Thank you. So, yeah, it was interesting that Rex mentioned earlier that certainly prior learning assessment is not new, and Kale knows that well because we've been working on it since 1974. So. But we've been doing some different things lately, and so I really wanted to share with you some of the new things that we're learning, and also some exciting things that are going on with the Texas Association of Community Colleges that could help you in efforts that you're maybe engaged in at the moment. Okay, it's going to make me do this every time. Hang on. Because if I just put this, it doesn't do it. Maybe it's that. It's that one. Okay. Awesome. Thanks. Technical differences. Okay, so this is when we talk about prior learning assessment generally, it is a huge change. And I think one of the things that we don't focus on enough is how much this actually becomes a big change within the institution, not just in terms of maintaining quality, in terms of doing things differently, in terms of assessing things differently, but it is actually a change in the way the institution's identity is even out there in some ways in the marketplace and the way people think of student success. We're talking about enrolling more adult students and giving people more access to education broadly. So this filters into even your marketing and your communications that you do at your institution. It affects so many different aspects. So when you think of it actually as a market, which is just kind of interesting to put it in that context, because you've probably seen these numbers before, but these are the Texas numbers. You've got high school graduates projected for this year is at 292,000. And then adults with some college and no degree is at over 3 million. So if you think about where your potential people are to enroll into your institution, there's actually many, many more of them in that over 25 with some college category. And that's not even counting people who have had no experience with college, right? Those people are in a whole other category, an even larger pool. And yet, if you think about the marketing that goes on for college and even people's perception of college, these are the kind of pictures that we see. This is the imagery, right? And that's problematic because, that is not even reality, especially with community colleges, as many of you know. The reality is that your student body is not made up 100%, 80%, or even 70%, or 60% in some cases. They actually look more like that. And this is funny that I found this stock photo. I have to say, I was like really excited that this existed. There was an actual stock photo of adults looking like college students on a campus. I was like, what? And
I'm not sure they'd actually be sitting on the ground. But
yeah, no, it was a little unrealistic, but it was the intention that I thought was really interesting, and so I love that. I love that picture is out there in the space, but it also looks so weird to us, right? I mean, even just to look at it, we're like, hey, there's something wrong with that picture, right? But there's also something a little bit right with it. And so how do we embed this whole thing, this whole idea of colleges being for everyone, not just for high school graduates? So just a little background on Kale, for those of you that don't know Kale, but probably many of you have heard of us. But our goal, and that might have been apparent in the question that I was asking, is meaningful learning, credentials, and work for every adult. So we do a lot in higher ed. We traditionally, have worked in prior learning assessment the whole time we've been around. But we also do a lot of work in the area of workforce and economic development. We work with employers. Our whole idea is to move people forward through the learning, then the credential, and then meaningful work as well. So we want that whole pathway to smooth out. That's our intention. So So we've been around for over 40 years. We're a nonprofit, and this is our whole focus. So how does this link, of course, to prior learning assessment? Well, we know what adults go through. We know all of the different roles that they're trying to play while they're completing college. And that in itself is frustrating enough. So I think the real question is, how much do we want to delay or frustrate them by making them take classes in things they already know? It's certainly not helpful. The other thing is that this Lumina funded Gallup poll that came out showed that 75% said they would be more likely to enroll in higher ed if they knew that they could earn this. So there's some kind of breakdown in communication that people don't know that this exists, but if they did, it would affect their decision to enroll. And 87% had no problem with it existing out there, so that's just another thing that's good to know. Even if they already had their degree, 87% said that seemed like a reasonable thing to offer. So, when we think about the value proposition for the student, it's saving time, it's saving money, and it's graduating faster. So we have to keep those things in mind in how we talk about this with students. And of course, it's also the all-encompassing pieces of prior learning assessment. So we talk about challenge exams, we talk about work experience a lot. Do we talk about, people are learning online all the time now. So do we talk about all the different ways that people are learning and how that can really impact what they do with prior learning assessment and how they reflect on their college education as they go forward with it? These are the methods, all the methods of prior learning assessment. And as in the description, I'm going to focus on portfolio assessment. And one of the reasons I'm going to focus on portfolio assessment is because a lot of these methods, actually, portfolio assessment is the least used, and we want to kind of understand why that is. The benefit of portfolio assessment is that it's actually the most flexible. So there are some ways that it obviously can fit into the puzzle, but for some reason it hasn't been there. So you have, of course, you have ACE credits, and you've got your challenge exams and CLEP tests and certificates, all the things that we were talking about in the presentation just prior to this. And portfolio assessment was mentioned briefly. The advantage of portfolio assessment is obviously that you could actually write a portfolio against anything, and the question lies with you, and what is it that you actually know? And so how do you establish some rigor in that? So prior learning assessment generally needs to be expanded because we know that it helps students persist to graduation. And you've probably seen these numbers. This is a study that Kale did of over 62,000 students, 64,000 students actually across the country, all different kinds of colleges. And we found out that associate degree students were 2 times more likely to persist to graduation if they had some prior learning assessment, and bachelor's degree 2.5 times more likely to persist to graduation. That is really important because we also know that part-time students, getting back to that complicated life of adults, part-time students are actually graduating at a rate that's about half what full-time students are. So most of those adults are falling into this category where only 25% of them are completing. So this becomes a big problem when we think also about things like performance-based funding. So you're going to have performance-based funding, and you know as community colleges that you've got half of your students are adults, and only 25% of them are predicted to graduate. One of 2 things could happen. You're going to just ditch them, right? Just focus on high school students, but you're not going to get to the kinds of completion numbers that are in that, proposal, that the 60 by 30, right? You're not going to get to those completion numbers with just those high school students as a state. But as an institution, you could do that. But how sad would that be? Because you're missing out on that larger market. So you have to find some ways And prior learning assessment is this really awesome way to actually help get those students to a position of being able to graduate. And getting them back up, when you get back to 2 times, now they're back up to the point where full-time students are, right? And high school graduates. So it's an equalizer in that respect. So LearningCounts, which was mentioned briefly. I don't know how many of you know about LearningCounts. Maybe show of hands if people heard of LearningCounts. Okay, so we've just got a couple. About half. So the reason LearningCounts is a portfolio assessment service that we launched at Kale. The reason we launched this service is because of some of the sticking points that we saw with portfolio. We saw that institutions were not offering it, students were not aware of it. We saw that a lot of times that was happening because the institution said, we have no way to pay faculty for this. It's a faculty overload. We heard them say we have no funding to train faculty how to do this, portfolio assessment in particular, assessing against learning outcomes, and as opposed to assessing coursework, which is a little bit different. So institutions also had no resources to train advisors and other people to start thinking about this. So they were lacking sort of the infrastructure that was needed. So we thought if we had a service that we could offer these types of trainings in a package deal. We could also offer the assessors, actually hire assessors, have a larger pool of assessors, because that's of course another thing that we always hear about is, you know, how do we assess this particular language that this person speaks when we don't have any faculty teaching that language? But, you know, we want to be able to assess that they know it. So there's all kinds of areas like that where people want to give a foreign language credit or some other kind of credit, and they don't have faculty that can actually do the assessment. So by having a large national pool of faculty assessors, that allows us to be able to offer any kind of assessment. That's what gives it the flexibility. So Kale cared about this because of that 40 years of experience and because of our standards. In particular, these standards are really, really important for portfolio assessment. You know, when people worry, and faculty in particular worry about the quality of and rigor of portfolio assessment, this is not an imaginary worry. It is a real worry. There are colleges that give away credit sometimes. There are maybe a lack of rigor. It's just sort of left up to one person to, you know, make a decision, but it's not against any sort of rubric, against any sort of standards for assessing the learning outcomes. So, important principle, the credit has to be for learning, not for experience. So you cannot walk in and say, I was a welder for this many years, but you have to show, as we talked about earlier, that you can demonstrate that you know the learning outcomes that are outlined in that course before you can get credit for the course. And that, of course, is in the best interest of the student, too. You don't want them to move on to the next level course and be lost. So you have to make sure that they know that. Also, subject matter experts have to make the credit recommendations. This is another problem that we saw at institutions where they didn't have the capacity to train all of their faculty to do this. And so what they did was they said they were going to have this one person who's going to look at portfolios. Well, now that person is not an IT faculty person, and then they get an IT portfolio, they're not going to be able to do a very good job of assessing that portfolio. So they have to be a subject matter expert in order to do it. And then, just like a course, you don't pay for the course because you got an A. You pay for the course, and then you work hard and you get an A. In the same way with portfolio assessment, you pay for the assessment. You have to pay up front for the assessment, whether you pass that assessment or not. And everybody should not pass it, because they shouldn't. Because some people don't know, right? So we really have to think about those standards in any kinds of portfolio assessment that we're doing, whether you're going to do it yourself or if you were going to use something like LearningCounts. So for those reasons, LearningCounts is structured in this particular way. We have an online portfolio development course. The one that we're offering in conjunction with this project with the Texas Association of Community Colleges is a do-it-yourself online modules. It is not instructor-led. We do have that as an option, and we have institutions that do that. We are finding a little bit of an issue in terms of the funding model for this, because you have to have a good value proposition for the student. They have to feel like they're going to save time and money, right? And this, without a subsidy, which is what TACC is helping to provide here, is a little bit of a subsidy so that the student can have access to this and it not be more of a cost than taking the course. So that's what we're trying to get to here. So it's do-it-yourself modules. The student goes through the course, they explore the options, and then they use our portfolio tool to upload their portfolio, submit it, and then they are matched with faculty subject matter experts who then assess the portfolio. So that's how it works, basically. So the key to portfolio assessment here is that the student has to go through these processes. They have to think about what they have learned. They have to reflect on their learning. They have to match what they know to learning outcomes of courses. This is key. I thought it was interesting what Rex said about the learning outcomes issue, right? You know, people are worried about competencies maybe because their learning outcomes aren't entirely in order, and we do see that coming through LearningCounts, so it's kind of interesting. It can be a bit of a mirror to what might be going on in some programs, because, you know, our assessor will be like, what am I assessing against? I don't understand. So it can help you check on your learning outcomes. From LearningCounts, we have worked with institutions to help them with their learning outcomes, help them determine what they are, and map them to competencies and do all that, because it is a bit of a challenge. But also, it doesn't have to be a challenge, because if you have done a good job in your learning outcomes, then all these other things can smooth out. It makes it much smoother for the student who's doing portfolio assessment. They know exactly what they're writing their portfolio to, and then the assessor knows exactly what they're assessing against. So learning outcomes are the key to this process. They have to write a learning narrative in this portfolio that is about them describing their own learning experience and how they learned it. Now, it's interesting that the learning narrative, while it does require college level writing, which means that you want to select students who have taken a composition course or something that they will be comfortable with writing and citing sources. We provide support materials on that, but it's definitely a good idea for them to already have that under their belt. But the advantage of having a learning narrative is you've got very little incidence of any kind of plagiarism, because they have to write about their own personal experience. And if we see two portfolios come in where two people had exactly the same personal experience, that's a little suspicious. So, you know, you can't copy from your neighbor. You can't have somebody else write your paper. You could, but it is almost as difficult as sitting down and writing it yourself in order to pull that off. So we think that that's why we see, you know, very few people that try and cheat on this process because of that learning narrative. Then, of course, there's supporting documentation. That might be work experience, documents, training, certifications, other things that are going into this portfolio, and then they submit it. So here are a couple of examples. I think it's good to just think about a couple of examples of students, because these are people that we probably know in circumstances like this, you know. Here's John. He was a town manager. He's a town manager in Maine. Obviously, he learned a lot of stuff doing that, you know, and so he was able to earn credits for municipal government operations and public fiscal management. And these are not the kind of things where you're going to have just a standardized test in a lot of cases. that's going to capture that. So that's where the portfolio sort of fits in. Same thing with the property manager there. So there were a lot of credits that she could earn for that experience, and those may not be things where there's a simple out-of-the-box challenge exam. And that's where portfolio can play a really good role. So how are we going to make portfolio as an option more accessible to students in Texas? That was the big question that we sat down with TACC and tried to think about. So what we did was we leveraged the Virtual College of Texas, and so that's already out there. And our do-it-yourself course is now one of the courses listed for the Virtual College of Texas. So that gave us a model to subsidize a little bit of the cost of that course. So now students pay $50 for that introductory course that tells them how to put together their portfolio. And you obviously register through your coordinator that you have at your college that already exists with Virtual College of Texas. Does everybody here have that relationship already, or is that, I know we have a little bit of a challenge over there in Lone Star, at the district level anyway. What about all of you? Do you have already Virtual College of Texas relationship? Okay, or not sure? Not sure, yeah. So that helps with this process, and that brings down the cost. Typically our course is $254, so this is a pretty decent subsidy here for the student to be able to take the course. Then they actually go directly back to us to have their portfolio assessed. So if they choose in that course that, yes, I think I can do a portfolio, then they go ahead, they purchase the portfolio assessment for $125, and then it will be submitted to an assessor. They will get a transcript from us, and we can provide you, if you're interested in doing this at your college, we can provide you with all of the pieces that we would need, so your registrar knows what it is when it comes in, all that good stuff. So there's also an advising element to this. So we are training a lot of the institutions to either they may assign a specific advisor, or one person may own the advising for this, or we may train a group of advisors. Kind of depends on how you want to roll it out at your institution. So these are all the prices. And so why is this important? Is that, and I think that these things, thinking on these things might also help you as you're talking to people at your institution, whether you use LearningCounts or not. The whole concept of PLA, we talked about the retention and graduation rates, and increasing enrollments, so all of those factors, but the retention I think is the most interesting one to just dig into for a minute, because there's just this thing out there where faculty just feel like, if I do this, then people are not going to take my class. So it's not in my best interests, right, to expose a student to this, because then they're not going to take my class. Yet in a big research study that we did, we found that students who did prior learning assessment took 9 more course credits, not including their PLA credits, 9 more course credits than students who did not do PLA. Why? Because they stayed, right? They stayed in the program. So the reality is actually that these students are going to take more of your courses, not less of your courses, if you expose them to this. They have more loyalty to the institution, they feel more confident, and they move forward. So those are some of the benefits to being able to do this. So that's a really important argument to make. So now we get into the details of what happens. What are some of the bottlenecks that we're trying to address here? I mean, if you just start thinking about credit for prior learning and where do you see it? Where is it on your website? How many clicks is it from the home page? Anybody know? Yeah. when people enroll, are they told about it right at enrollment? Are there materials for that? Is it given to them as an option? We have one institution that works with LearningCounts that actually put on their application a checkbox that says, would you be interested in learning about earning credit for what you know from your work and life experience? People check it off. It goes to an advisor who knows all about how to advise them on that. And they have uptake rates for portfolio assessment that are, in the 7 or 8% range. And when you think about the number of adult students you have, that would be a lot of portfolios, right? But there has to be a thinking change there, and it has to be communicated. And then, of course, there's on the business development or workforce development side. This is very interesting. I had some conversations yesterday with some people from the Texas Association of Business, and they are thinking this is efficient. Businesses understand that this is more efficient for, if they're going to pay tuition for their employees to go to college, they don't want them taking a course in something that they just trained them to do the year before. So they're very interested in the efficiency, and you can make a really good argument to your partners about this if you are offering it. But of course you have to offer it, right? In order to do that. So all those people coming through have to know that. Administrative flow is a huge obstacle. And that's part of the reason why you have the advisor and faculty resistance, other than the issue of people are not going to take my course and that's going to be terrible. The other issue is that they're just uncomfortable. They think the student's going to get lost. And this is a very real concern. So, I've seen scenarios where, you've got a page that talks about this on the website. Person clicks to it, it goes to a generic email box. Somebody talks to them about enrollment. The person says, what about credit for some of my work experience? And the advisor says, we don't do that. Happens all the time. All the time that's happening, right? Because there's a breakdown in communication, or the flow is not outlined well and everybody doesn't understand what they're supposed to do. So, in some cases with institutions, we've said, okay, let's just take that link that you have on your website that's going to this, and let's make sure that we put that student in contact with one advisor who we know is going to say the right thing, who understands the process. And so we end up doing that in a lot of situations, at least to make sure that we're not losing people, because it's quite amazing how many people can get lost. What makes this complicated is because you've got all of these different people who are involved in this process. And at this point, I wanted to show you all what we're working on with this work with TACC. Oops, sorry, just opened up the one I closed. Okay. So we were trying to think of how can we create a tool that is going to give people a way to navigate this, give institutions a way to navigate this. So what we created was something that has sort of a checklist for the various roles of the institution. And believe it or not, each role only has a one-page checklist. So the issue here is not that it is a ton of work for one person or for multiple people, but the issue is that it is a little bit of work for a lot of different people. And so how do you communicate that out? So, starting with if you have, if you've got a VP, provost, or your president is on board with doing something like this, really great idea to explain this concept to them, the different people that need to be involved, and hold some sort of meeting, appoint a person. You do need to appoint a person to be your key project manager on it. That doesn't mean it's a full-time job, but you just have to have somebody own it. And then you have to bring in all of the various stakeholders. So if you know you want marketing to do some things here, if you know you want the advisors to do some things here, if you know you want to look at admissions, it's great to start out with this initial sort of, hey, this is what we're doing, and it's going to be great, and here's the roles that each of you have. And then this quarterly meetings too. Let's keep it going, because everybody's so busy. I mean, this is what happens. They start doing other things. So the longest list here is for the project manager, and it's mostly about coordinating those people and getting them together and making sure that they do their pieces. So when we dive through, the registrar in this particular case just has to understand this transcript that we will be sending and how they're going to deal with those credits. And so that's the first step there. Then the advisors have a pretty decent checklist, although most of it here is about finding the person who is the right fit. So identifying who's the right fit here. And doing outreach to students that might benefit from that. We go back to the save time, save money, get your degree faster. Students need to understand that. We have all of these things if you want to share stories, any of these kinds of things, but once again, a lot of this is a flow issue of how do you build it into the advisor's existing workload so it doesn't become overwhelming. We think that the advisor workload is a big problem with this, and that's one reason why we're experimenting with some other models that might actually take the load, she knows about this, that might take the load off of the advisors and allow the students to do a lot of self-exploration before they opt in. But ideally, they still need to go back to their advisor and talk to them about whether it's going to fit into their degree plan, so they still need to participate in that. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then the marketing team. So there are tools, we're going to go through these, that have been provided for this particular project in Texas. So I'll go through those. And it's really just about putting together a schedule to how you're going to drive students to this website that's already been built. And are you going to send out emails on a regular basis? So there's a whole process for that. And hopefully, if you can do all of that, you can really start to get things rolling in a few weeks. So it's not that it's a huge workload. It is more about how many different people are involved and making sure that they're all on the same page. So if we jump back to the PowerPoint here, I'll just go through a couple of the slideshow. So a couple of other things. How much time do we have? Got till, just want to make sure.
You've got until 11:20, so you've got 21 minutes.
21 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I like this part. This is because of my marketing background. So this is actually a study done by the Parthenon Group called the Differentiated University, and it is on the topic of personas. So personas are something that are used in marketing to really get under the skin, really begin to empathize with your audience that you're marketing to. It goes beyond demographics. So it's not this person is Latino and this person is over 25 and this person is 45 to 54. It is thinking actually about what their lives are like, what their concerns are, and what they love and don't love. So they interviewed all of these students, did all these focus groups, and they developed these personas. And they also broke out how many students fit into these different types of personas. The interesting thing here is that these probably look really, really familiar to us. You've got aspiring academics, usually traditional age students with impressive academic profiles. You've got career starters. That's probably a big one that a lot of you are marketing to. So those are high school students who are looking to get a certificate or they're looking to do something very quickly to get into a job. So there's that group, that's 18%. And then you have coming of age, and this is of course the one that's all in the media and everything and in the movies, right? You know, it's very much around the active social culture, exploring your potential, you know, and all of the different opportunities in college. I think what's interesting about that is they're only 11% of the total of college students. And yet, from a marketing and a media perspective, then you have these personas, which sort of fit into the adult learner category in most cases. They're the career accelerators. And career accelerators are people who started in a career, now they want to get further ahead in their career, and they can't do it without their degree. They are very interested in prior learning assessment, as it showed here from the focus groups. And we had no tie to this study, so I didn't have any influence over this. And they still said that they were looking for institutions that award credit for their previous academic experience as well as their job experience. And then academic wanderers, I don't like that term, but what they really mean is these are the people that have come in and out. They started and they stopped, and they started and they stopped. I call them, they're really the busy people that really, really want to finish, and that's why they keep trying. And so anything we can help them do to finish is wonderful. And then there's the industry switchers. And those are the people that are going from one career to a totally different career. I just talked to my Uber driver today. She's one of those people. And she's attending here to do that career change. So they're the other group. And the question is, are there overlaps between that? Requires more caution. And that's one of the things that the advisors have to understand is, are there transferable skills from one to the other? Does the degree plan that the student has and the life experience, work experience, and learning that they've achieved through that really fit into where they're going? That requires a little bit more complex conversation than if somebody's, you know, trying to get a marketing degree and they've worked in marketing for 10 years. So, what do they care about? This was a survey that we did of LearningCounts students. 90% were all about the saving time and money. I think what's interesting here, though, 83% experienced a sense of personal pride upon completion of their portfolio. So I'm going to confess at this moment that I'm super biased. I went back to school as an adult, and I did a portfolio before I was ever hired by Kale. I started at a community college, had an advertising design certificate, worked in an ad agency for 10 years, ended up doing a whole bunch of different things, and then went back to college to get my degree. One of the great things about the program that I went to was that they told me about it right away, or I never would have enrolled. This was a private institution, so for me this was a lot of money to pay. I thought I was going to have to go for 8 years, which is why I probably spent 7 years not doing it. You know how that goes, right? A little procrastination, a little excuse. And right in the very first informational session, they started talking to me about my transfer credits from community college, and they started talking to me about the portfolios that I could write. And all of a sudden I could see the whole thing, I could do this in 2 or 3 years, changed completely my perspective, and I was enrolled immediately after that, in the very next semester. And I graduated in 2.5 years. So it completely changed that whole equation for me. But I wouldn't have done it if they had, you know, if they was just expecting me to enroll and then maybe later kind of find out about it by somebody, or, you know, have a girl that works for me, and she actually went back as an adult as well, and she found out about prior learning assessment before she came to work at Kale, but she found out about it in her last semester in the bathroom. Because she overheard 2 girls in the bathroom talking, and somebody said, "Hey, I just did this great thing and I got all these credits." And then she went to her advisor, and her advisor was like, "Well, it's too late for that now because you're almost done." So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that happens. So that's why, you know, it's really important that we get that out there up front, and that we emphasize this experience, this personal pride that they can achieve, because we think that one of the reasons why they complete is because it gives them so much of, I remember I was also out of school for 10 years or more, and you're like, I just did a certificate, I'm not really college material, it's not really, I don't know if I'm going to do so well. What about the math class? I hate math. And so that's the kind of stuff that they come with. You do a portfolio and you have a PhD, a subject matter expert say, yes, you know what market research is. This is an excellent market research plan. All of a sudden you're like, okay, like maybe I'm not so far behind. Maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe I can do this faster than I thought. Maybe I am college material. In fact, maybe I'm master's student material. It changes that perception. And the process of portfolio, and this is, I think, is a very specific thing with portfolio, because of that learning narrative, you have to reflect on your life. And it actually helps people to set life goals and map career and education goals, because they're thinking about it with the context of their whole person. Not being treated like they just walked in off the street and they have no future, no past. They only have a future, right? And that, I think, then gets people thinking like, oh, I don't know, I've always been interested in this, or maybe I should do this, right? But they get very confused. When they start to reflect on their whole life experience, then they start to think, you know what I really was good at this job? Like, I was a really good manager of people, or I was really, and they start thinking about the aspects of their job where they did a lot of learning. And they usually did that learning because they enjoyed it so much, right? That particular aspect of their job. So it helps them also to begin to think about what their future goals should be. So that's why it's pretty important to do it early in the process. I know that my portfolio process and prior learning assessment helped me to establish a love of marketing. I do have a love of marketing, but also a love of education, which is, and working at a nonprofit, right? Those were things that came out of my college experience, but part of it was because I started to think about all those nonprofit clients that I had and what I was interested in helping them do. And so that reflection, I think, really helps. Oops, did the wrong one. All right. Most of our portfolios are done in these areas. Under business and management is also communications and marketing. We actually get a lot in that specific area, communications and marketing. So just in terms of thinking, you might be thinking, wow, okay, I would love to offer this to everybody in my institution, but how am I going to do that? That's not going to happen. This is too big of a shift for people. So sometimes an institution will start with just a program. And a lot of times you will have programs that are already, the IT faculty have already kind of been doing this. As Mike was talking about, and I was talking to him about this too, and it's like, so they're awarding, they're awarding sort of advanced placement, but then the person still has to go get the credit in something else, but at least they're trying to not make them take classes and stuff they already know, right? So faculty that are in those particular fields might be a lot more open to this than faculty in others. So it can be a good way to get it rolling. So here's some of the tools that come from working with Kale and with LearningCounts specifically. One is that we do have a website, learningcounts.org. You can go there and check it out. It is basically designed to direct students to colleges. Now, there was a time when our website was designed to enroll people in portfolio assessment. Problem was that we didn't know what college they were going to, we didn't know what their degree plan was, we didn't know if they were going to take the credits, we didn't know, so we had all those problems. Financial aid was not, able to be used, all those kinds of things. So what we did is now we're very focused on working with individual colleges and making sure that student has a streamlined process and a home where they can find the answers that they need. where they can get the syllabus and the learning outcomes of the course, where they can talk to their advisor about how it'll fit in their degree plan. And so for that reason, our website now is fully focused on sending them to those colleges to enroll. And then our hope is that those colleges will then tell them about portfolio assessment and send them to us for that. For TACC, we have this website. So the website tells people about how they can earn credit for what they know. You'll notice we're not using terms on here like prior learning assessment. That's another thing I see a lot. This is my marketing person coming out. It's like you go to the prior learning assessment page and it says, you must not do a portfolio in these areas. You must meet all of our policies for it. That is not very motivating, not very motivating. Sometimes you see that. And yes, those policies need to be, they need to know those policies. That conversation needs to happen. But it certainly doesn't need to be the first and only thing that they see. And so this is what this was designed to kind of motivate them to consider it. We also have something called the credit predictor. So this is a fun little tool. It all works on your mobile device, all that good stuff. It only takes about 5 minutes. It gives them a notion of what this potentially could do for them. So you start answering some questions, gives you a little avatar, gives you a little motivational merit badges as you go along. It's kind of fun. And then at the end, it tells you, here are some different options for you. You might be good fit for a club test. You should ask about an AP exam. You should ask about doing a portfolio. You could potentially, and we use basically the tuition here in Texas at community colleges, and we match it to the, and we also put in the cost of the course and the portfolio in this model. And they can see exactly how much time and money they could potentially save by doing this. So it's not an exact science, obviously, but it's more designed to get them to think of the potential. It also then provides us with a list of people who are interested so that we can go back to you and say, here's some people who have expressed interest. For this to work, however, you have to link to it, right? You have to get it up on your site. People have to know that it exists. So we have these little buttons. We can change these to any color you want. But we could actually put this right up on your webpage. So say you have a transfer credit page. You talk about all this stuff, maybe a little button on the side of the transfer credit page. Boom, now they can go out to the credit predictor and check it out right away. So this just makes it easy, because I know how hard it is to get changes on the website, right? But maybe being able to just add a button or a link out will allow you to be able to promote it a little bit more effectively. That's our hope. Another key is email. So this is with your current students or embedding it into your admissions process. So if you have people who've inquired and they're kind of, they're getting maybe certain emails at certain times, this can be a good way to keep them engaged, is to know that this is another option that's available to them, especially if you have a lot of adults who are interested. This particular email was designed by a behavioral science firm. We got some help through a grant from the Joyce Foundation to have this behavioral science firm kind of look at what caused students to come and go and stop out. And this was one of the things that they gave us, which was this email. You'll see a couple of things. This is sort of the basic marketing thing, like let them know right away what the benefit is. This is more your behavioral science. People hate more than 3 choices, apparently. If they get more than 3 choices, they make no choices. That's actually what happens. So we give them 2 choices. Yes, I want to go and learn more. No, but but I might consider it in the future, but not now. Another thing here is a picture of the advisor. So if you have a specific advisor who's working on prior learning assessment, showing a picture there in their email that makes a difference as well because people react to people. And they also don't feel like they're just getting some sort of automated, anonymous message, and now they know who they're going to talk to when they get there. We also have this video. You can check this out at kale.org/getcredit. We use this video across the board. All of our institutions that are not using LearningCounts, anyone can use this to talk about PLA. It is on YouTube, and so you can link to it or embed it in your website. We don't care. It is for everyone's consumption. It talks about all forms of PLA as well, not just portfolio assessment. These are stories, different people. We've got like a veteran and a stay-at-home mom and somebody who works in the healthcare field. And they each talk about different forms of assessment. They talk about CLEPs, they talk about ACE credits, so they talk about different things. So it's a good way to, in common language and through stories, convey this to students. So what you really want to take back to your marketing people is that there are these tools out there, that they're missing a large market, and that they really need to think about what they're already doing, and are there ways to incorporate this? So when you think about even those buttons, so when they send out the catalog, is there a page in there about prior learning assessment? Is there, if they send out direct mail pieces, if they run ads, is there a mention of, you can earn credit for what you know at our college? Like, there are things that they are already doing where this can become embedded in it, and it doesn't have to cost extra money to do. It's just a matter of thinking of the market as not just one thing, but thinking of the market as two audiences that you're trying to reach instead of just one. And so that's a key in talking with them. As I mentioned, we have lots of other stuff. We've got other email addresses, messages, radio ad scripts, social media, student testimonials, social media posts, all those kinds of things. We have kind of ready to go. So if you get into a conversation with your marketing people and they're starting to feel like, yeah, I think this is something that we should promote more broadly, but what do we say in an ad about prior learning assessment? Well, they don't have to start from scratch. We have some things that they can start with and work from there. So the basic checklist for moving through on the marketing front, once again, whether you were if you were using LearningCounts or not, you really need to find a contact that those students can work through. You have to get that administrative flow down. And then you really need to get regular email and compile a list of the appropriate students for that. And we can provide you with those tools and that sort of assistance even if you're not participating in the LearningCounts initiative. So with that, I would just like to say thank you all for paying attention here during my presentation. I really hope that you picked up some things for your own program. I have a sign-up sheet up here. If you want to, I know you got one here as well, but if you are particularly interested in becoming part of this Tech Colleges program, let me know, and then we can, start the whole process. So I have a sign-up sheet for that, or you can give me your card, whatever works best. So, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.